My name's Betty Hinshaw. My date of birth is May 17, 1925. I was born in St. Louis in a hospital and grew up in Webster Groves, Missouri, which is just outside of St. Louis, until I met my husband and we moved to Jacksonville, Florida.
We have your signed permission, but we want to get it on the video that we have your permission to do the interview.
Yes, you have my permission.
Thank you, Betty. Tell me, Betty, who were your parents?
My parents were, my dad's name was Edwin Brockmeyer, and my mother's name was Mildred Pauls, until Mildred Pauls Brockmeyer.
Okay, thank you. Tell me about your family when you were growing up. Who were your siblings, your brothers and sisters?
I just had one. I have one sister whose name is Suzanne Rauschen, and she now lives in Prairie Grove.
Okay, thank you. Tell me, when you were growing up, what business was your family in, your father and parents? What did they do?
My father received a degree in architecture, and he became a building contractor. My mother went through Central Institute for the Deaf as a teacher, and she was quite well known and quite well respected.
Nice. Did you do anything to help with in the family businesses in any way?
No, I did not. I didn't help the family business in any way. My father's office was in the Missouri Theater Building in St. Louis, and Mother's school was in downtown St. Louis, and I just went to school.
Okay. Tell me about your husband. Who was your husband and how did you meet him?
My husband is Jerry Hinshaw, and yeah, we met at Ralston Purina. That's where I worked. After I graduated from Washington University and went to Miss Hickey's Secretarial School. That's a terrible name, but Dad wanted me to be able to do something in case I ever had to be out on my own. And so I was on the 5th floor at Ralston Purina. I was a secretary. He was down on the 1st floor. And so one day I asked one of my bosses if there were any eligible men around. And he said, here's some papers. Take them down to Jerry Hinshaw. So I did, and nothing developed for a while. But eventually it did.
Well, tell me, how did you and your husband Jerry end up in Tontitown, or south of Tontitown?
Well, he was in the poultry business in Purina. And Purina moved us first to Jacksonville, Florida, and then he resigned and went to Dallas with Western Hatcheries. And then somehow, I don't really know how, he and Arbor Acres Farm out of Glastonbury, Connecticut got together. And Henry Saglio, the president, wanted my husband to find a place in southeastern part of the United States where we could set up another branch office. And so Jerry traveled all around, but he really did like this area. It was so pretty. It had the hills. It had places to build the chicken houses. It was, a lot of it was developing chicken country. And so this is where he decided to move us, his family to move us here.
So tell me about your family that you and Jerry raised.
Well, I have 4 of the most wonderful kids possible. And they were all born in the 1950s, so I thought that was a pretty good record. And, and my oldest was Anita Louise, who became Sonny. My second was Kathy Elizabeth, who she named herself Catherine. My third was Ross Edwin, and my fourth was Dawn Marie. Well, my daughter Sonny, I don't really know what piqued her interest in deciding to run, except that she didn't believe that Tontitown, well, I don't quite know how to say it, but I guess she decided it would be a good idea for her to run because she had some other ideas about the government. And so she ran in 2008 and served in 2009 and 2010. And then later she served in 2013 and 2014. And she never let anything get under her skin. She was very good like that, just like her father. And she studied hard. She ordered the books of ordinances and law and studied them, and knew the people to talk to in the municipal league, wherever she had to. So she really took to it like a duck to water.
Good. Tell me about your earliest memories of Tontitown. When did you move here, and what do you remember the first time of going to town?
I saw my first snake. Jerry promised me I wouldn't have any snakes, but I did. He let me off at the creek down there. It was so pretty with watercress and all, and it flowed out of the spring house under the road and into this stream. And I got out and looked at it, and there was a snake right there in the watercress. So that was my first memory. When he told us that we were going to move here, I grew up in St. Louis, I lived in Jacksonville, Florida, I lived in Dallas, and I said, Arkansas? And please, Jerry, just be sure there's a doctor there. And so that was my vision of what Arkansas was, you know, very, very country. And I had never lived in the country. So I loved it. I just loved it. But the roads were very, very dusty. It was not a paved road where that we lived on. It was just completely different from anything I had ever experienced. But I grew to love it, except for the dust. What was the town like? Well, it was not very big. I remember mainly the Tontitown Mercantile that Richard Ardemani had, because he carried so many different things. And I would run up a bill there every now and then and get myself in trouble. But I don't really remember, except 68 was 2-lane. It's now 412 and 4-lane with a suicide lane, and houses galore everywhere. And it's just not as much country as it used to be, but it's still beautiful.
Where did you live when you first moved here?
We moved into an old house on Route 4 that Joe Steele once lived in. It was built in 1903, and it became Wheeler Road and then Barrington Road. And it did not have a bathroom, so when Jerry told us we were going to move here, he worked night and day to fix that old house, and he put in a bathroom. And so that's what made it what they called modern. If you had a bathroom, it was modern.
About what year was that, if you remember?
56, 1950. We moved in 1956 into that house, and the windows didn't quite fit anymore. The floors sloped a little bit. Not very many cabinets in the kitchen, but the best thing was having a bathroom put in.
You talked about going to Artemati's store. What other places in Tontitown do you remember going to?
You know, I don't really remember going to any. Oh, except the restaurants eventually. Yes, we loved to go to the restaurants. There was, let's see, Mary Maestry's. That was the most famous one. And Ed Maestry was such a good host. And it was in an old house and had so much atmosphere. And really good spaghetti, really good spaghetti. And I remember that Lois Artemani worked there. And she was so good, so friendly. She was a waitress. And then another place was the Venetian Inn. And who was it that worked there that was so good that we loved always to go back there too? It was Penalto. Eloise, I can't think what her name was. But, and then, of course, Mama Z's, and that was with Elsie Zuppo and Julie Zuppo, and they were always friendly greeters. So Tontitown was a good place to eat. We ate there a lot.
Who were some of the first people besides the merchants that you remember that you've already mentioned? Who else do you remember meeting, the people of the town, or some of the prominent ones that stand out in your memories?
Well, of course, there were the workers here for Arbor Acres Farm. And the Claypools were the ones I would remember the most, and they were so reliable. Slim and Opal Claypool, and they had 4 children. Then there was Ravenel Claypool, and I can't remember her husband's name. But one of their daughter was named Janadel, and my daughter Catherine played with Janadel. They became real good friends. And their son Douglas, had a sad ending. He got his car in the creek down here, and I don't know whether he was knocked out when his car went into the creek or what, but the tailpipe was down in the water, and so he died of monoxide poisoning. And one of Opal's sons, their only son, Charles, he was killed in an automobile wreck. So there were 3 daughters left, and they were wonderful, wonderful girls. Who else do I remember? Well, there were the managers of the Arbor Acres Farm. What was his first name? Ronnie Delosier. And then there was Joe Stubblefield, and then his wife Kathleen. And their daughter Teresa played with my daughter Dawn. They were real good buddies. And then there was Barbara and Morris Looper and his wife Barbara. And they had 4 children. And all of my children and their children were real good buddies. And we often, well, in fact, I learned from Barbara Looper that you could make tuna fish salad with apples if you didn't have any celery. So I thought that was nice. And Morris, I remember one thing about him in particular. We had a dog that got into some poison, and that poor dog was in such pain. And Morris brought a gun out and shot him and put him out of his pain. And I remember that I thought that was so nice of him, kind of him to do that.
Tell me more about your husband's business, Arbor Acres. What was it, and what did he do around here? Tell me more about it.
He worked like the dickens, I can tell you that. My husband, in his work, of course, he was the general manager, and to tell you the truth, I just don't remember everything that he did. He saw to it that these breeder type chickens were raised here, and they were sold all over. Became one of the biggest operations for Arbor Acres that there was. And he built a hatchery, and he built chicken houses for 66,000 chickens. And that lasted for several years, and then he got into the cattle business and other things that he was interested in.
Tell me about your husband's involvement in politics. How did he get involved, and then kind of tell me start from the beginning and tell me what happened.
My husband got involved in politics according to some notes that I read, and thanks to Brenda Blagg, I have saved several newspaper articles, and she wrote quite extensively about him. He went up to Washington, D.C., and while he was up there, he realized that Jim Trimble, who had been a good congressman for many, many years for the 3rd District, was not well and not doing as well as he could have done or had done. And so he came back and decided to try to find somebody to run for as a Republican against Jim Trimble. And he ended up being the one that did it. And so it was a hard race. He worked his tail off, and he lost, but he got 47% of the vote. So that was good. And he set up the road for John Paul Hammerschmidt, and John Paul always gave Jerry credit for that.
Tell me about whenever you met with Governor Rockefeller during that time you were running, your husband was running for office. How did the meeting come about, and what was done in the meeting?
Well, I met Winthrop Rockefeller in 1964. He was running for governor, and Jerry was running against Jim Trimble. And I tell you, Winthrop Rockefeller, he was a peach. He was just the nicest gentleman. And I didn't see much of him because if I was going anywhere, it was with Jerry, and they didn't Winthrop Rockefeller and Jerry didn't travel together at all, that I remember anyway. So, but we had a lawn party for Mr. Rockefeller, and it was in the summer. It was hot, and I remember I had a bowl of shrimp out there in the yard, and the flies were just gathering there, and I was waving the flies away. And Winthrop Rockefeller came up to thank me, and he kissed my hand. And you know what women do when that happens, they don't wash their hand for a week. So that was the most of what I remember about him, except having dinner occasionally with him. You know, when my Jerry would eat with him, I'd go along. And I was up at Petty Jean one time, when he held some kind of a political gathering, and that was a beautiful, beautiful spot.
Talk about when your husband got involved in the legislature. What year was it, if you remember, and then how long did he serve? And tell me what you can remember about that.
My husband, also in politics, he did get into the legislature, but before that, he served 4 years as Justice of the Peace for Washington County because he saw that the county was changing. He said, I don't know how it was changing. But then from there, he decided to run for state legislature. And let's see, what year was that? That was 1980, I think. And he ran a hard race. You know, I can't remember who he was running against. But anyway, he won, and he served for 16 years. Did a good job. One of the funniest things he did was to, and the law was passed, to make farmers responsible for getting rid of the thistles in their fields because cattle won't eat when the fields are filled with thistles. And so the law was passed, and if you saw somebody with thistles in their pastures and you reported him, he had to get rid of the thistles or else he got fined. And so Mike Golden then made a cartoon of that and said, hey fella, what are you in for? And the fella said, marijuana? And the fella said, no, what I'm in for is I sat on a thistle in somebody's pasture and I got caught. So anyway, but the most important law that Jerry felt that he passed was the visual acuity test, because according to some notes I had, Arkansas was the only state without a test for that. And so many old people were driving that couldn't really see well. So Jerry felt that he really saved a lot of lives by getting that law passed.
What else can you remember from his service in the legislature? How long? Do you remember how long he was in the House and Senate, or was he in?
Well, he was just in the House of Representatives, and that was for 16 years. And Clinton called him his favorite Republican.
Talk about that. When would he say that, and what did he mean by that?
Oh, well, I was not down there. I was not down with Jerry except for a few gatherings because I was home here taking care of the children. And I don't know why Bill Clinton called him his favorite Republican, except that they got along well. That's all I can say.
Talk about whenever Jerry served as a state rep, what was his relationship with the Tontitown people and the government? How would they lobby him, and what would he try to do to help them?
Well, Jerry, as a state representative, was very, very helpful. I don't know how many people have told me that he helped each one so much. And in Tontitown, I kind of feel like one of the best things he did, and I don't know if it was the first thing he did or not, but he felt as though the fire insurance for the families should come down. But they were at a very high rate because there was no fire department here. And so he and Leon Zulpel, they formed a firm friendship. And Leon was a wonderful fellow, as was his wife, Sally. And they got what was it called, a brush fire truck. And then, I don't remember much about that, but the first fire engine that they got secondhand in Oklahoma. and I think they paid $15,000 for it. And Jerry said he and Leon just hooped and hollered all the way back from Oklahoma, driving behind that fire truck. And of course, that's one of the best things that could. And now, you know, Tontitown has beautiful fire trucks, and I don't know how many. But the fire rates have certainly come down, insurance rates, yeah.
Now, let's talk about your kids. I know you didn't go to school here, but where did your kids go to school here?
Well, Sonny and Kathy started up at Stony Point. That was on Highway 112. And it's 2-room schoolhouse, 2 Holler outhouses, one for boys and one for girls. They took their lunches, and they had the most wonderful teacher, Mrs. Helen Mount. Mr. N.T. Griffith was the principal. And it really is true, schools draw the community together. That's how we got to know a lot of the people here in this area, because we help wax the floors, we wash the windows, we help with curtains. I tried to play the piano for their Christmas play, and of course I hit sour notes galore. And but we really did work together well, and it was fun. And so then, when the Springdale schools consolidated, they all moved into Springdale and closed up Stony Point. So, but I remember Dawn told me that when she was in Springdale, going to those schools, that I don't know how this happened. She said a new world opened for her because she met so many Tontitown people. And I guess that must have been about the time that the Catholic school closed. And so the Tontitown people came into Springdale. But she told me about, let's see, who was it? Denise Franco, I think, and Carla Artemani, and Laura Zuppo, and a real good friend was Mark Artemani, and Aggie Maestri, whose father was mayor at one time of Tontitown. So those were a few of her friends, and my son, he made friends with, I remember, who was Zuppo? Well, anyway, one of the Zuppo boys, Bill Zuppo, that's who it was. Joe Reed and Jimmy Russell, so local boys.
Well, what would your kids and their friends do for fun back in the day in Tontitown when they were little and you were raising them? What would they do?
What would they do for fun? I know Ross and his friends, they found a cave over along Reed Valley Road, that stream over there. And I never did see that cave. And when the mothers found out about it, though, they were a little unhappy because it could have been dangerous. So, what did they do? Well, I know we had a lot of parties up here for the school kids, ice cream parties and Halloween parties and things like that. But I remember now, they had their bikes to ride. And Sonny and Kathy started working for the Egg Depot, and they got 25 cents an hour. And I don't know how old they were, but Kathy said that I made them put it in a savings account, but I let them have $1 a week. And so she and her sister Sonny would get on their bikes, and Ross says he remembers this too, riding a bike up to Tontitown Mercantile and buying an RC Cola and a moon pie and a comic book. And then they'd sit in the shade someplace and enjoy.
What would you, when you moved to Tontitown, first came here, what would you and your husband and your friends do for fun?
Well, to tell you the truth, not much. Jerry was a workaholic, and he was getting his feet on the ground. I was having babies, and it was just raising a family.
Okay. What do you remember about the Tontitown Grape Festival? When was the first time you went? First of all, what's your earliest memories? What was it like, and what do you remember?
What do I remember about the Tontitown Grape Festival? Is that people were enjoying it, that the spaghetti suppers were grand. They were so good. And I remember playing bingo. I loved to play bingo, and that was the thing I enjoyed most about the Grape Festival. I do remember the first time, I don't know what year it was, that they introduced grape ice cream. And we could get a grape ice cream cone. So that was a little different. I wasn't real sure that I liked it. But it was just a big gathering. People came. I mean, they worked on making spaghetti for weeks, the Italian people, and it was always a success. And Winthrop Rockefeller spoke up there one night when he was governor. And Jerry also spoke up there one night, and it was raining cats and dogs. It seemed like it always rained one night during the Grape Festival.
Did you ever help with any of the stuff at the Grape Festival, or?
I never did help with anything concerning the Grape Festival except by giving my money to eat the dinner.
Do you remember going with your husband and campaigning during the festival? If so, tell me about it.
No, I do not. I do not remember going with Jerry to campaign at the Grape Festival. One thing that the children and I did, a lot of his votes were over in Siloam Springs, and we would go over there in the dark of night. I guess it was early night, and we would put flyers out under the windshield wipers of the cars in Siloam Springs. So I think the children kind of really enjoyed doing that. As far as campaigning around Tontitown, at one time, Jerry had a little campaign trailer up there at Tontitown, and that I ran, that where people could come in and ask about Jerry and get campaign literature. But when he first ran, when he ran for state representative, he had an office in Springdale on Emma Avenue. And Marty Taldo, who lives right up the road, he hired her, and she and I ran that office. And we had great fun, and people came in and got campaign literature, and we answered the phone, we typed letters, anything that was needed there, we did. And we made a success of it, too. Marty Taldo was a good person to work with.
Do you ever remember any of the baseball games in Tontitown?
No, we were not affiliate. We did not play baseball. We didn't join in any of those games.
Okay. What are some of you mentioned earlier that it was a 2-lane road and then now it was bigger. What are some of the other big changes you've noticed over the years? There's been many, but are there some that stand out as maybe more important or the bigger ones?
Well, I remember changes. One of the things, of course, is the paving of the road in front of our house. That was a big, big change. And because at first there weren't too many cars that came along. And when one did come, we'd run to the door, and I would, to see who it was, see if I recognized it. And but as time went on, this Barrington Road has become a speedway, really. Other changes, let's see. Of course, 68 becoming bigger. We had a feed mill up at the corner, the southwest corner of 68 and what is now Barrington, and it burned down. And Ross can remember Louis Perona and Jerry pulling the vehicles, the trucks, out of that burning building before they caught on fire. And I think that was pretty bold of them and very dangerous, but they got the trucks out, and the feed mill burned to the ground. So what other changes might I remember? The fact that there were no houses. There used to be hog houses on that hill across the road. That was gone. The Barrington Road gradually got more houses, and of course now, at closer you get to Highway 412, the more little groups of houses that you see, you know, subdivisions, that's the word I want.
What are some things maybe that I hadn't thought to ask you about that you remember about Tontitown area that you want to say, or the Tontitown people?
Oh, yes. Well, you know, one thing I forgot to mention, and I don't know if I really remember this, if I saw it, or if I remember it as a story that somebody told me, but it's true. When we first moved here, and this road was just a gravel road, there was a woman up Arbor Acres Road. Of course, it wasn't called Arbor Acres Road, but she was in her reaching for some corn in the corn house, or whatever you called it, and she was bitten by a copperhead, and on her hand when she reached up for the corn. And she hitched up horses to a cart, a horse, I guess, to a cart, got a bowl of kerosene, and kept that arm in that bowl of kerosene and took that horse up into Springdale for treatment for her arm. Now, isn't that a tale? She was a brave woman. She was a brave woman.
If someone came to you and said, "I've never heard of Tontitown, or I've never been there," what's the town like? What would you tell them?
Well, it's just more, what would I tell people if it was what was Tontitown like now? Well, it's full of friendly people. It's full of good places to eat, and it is growing. And I don't know, it's just in a lovely spot in the United States.
To answer this sentence for me, my favorite thing about Tontitown is?
My favorite thing about Tontitown is some of the people, my extension club. I was in this extension club, cooperative extension, homemakers club for over 50 years. And so we formed a friendship and did a lot of good around here. So that and the people, I guess, are the things I like best about Tontitown.
Tell me about your property in Tontitown. Where is it, and how would people know what it is?
Our property in Tontitown is about 2.5 miles from Highway 412 south of it. And people recognize it because of the lake that Jerry had built. There was just a stream running through it at one time. And so he had that all dug out and the dam built that our drive is on. And then he couldn't make the water stick. It kept leaking out. And I've forgotten what it was that he finally found to throw down there on that ground. And then he had the cows come in and stamp on it all. And then the stream finally filled the lake and made the lake. And people have come to fish on it ever since. He always allowed people to fish. And one thing that's happened lately is that the firemen and policemen of Tontitown and Elm Springs have held a fishing derby for children in June from like 8 to 11, and they give prizes for the biggest fish. And I don't know what the other prizes are. I think they give 3. But they have it stocked by the Game and Fish Commission. And so they put like 500 or 800 pounds of catfish in there. And so the children just have a really good time. And I'm just thrilled that they do that. It's wonderful. They take care of getting it mowed. They get the little porta potties out there, the policemen, and they do everything. Take care of it. I have nothing to do with it except just offer it, open it for them to use.
What other stories did you have that you wanted to share? I thought you said.
Well, yes. One was the fact that when Jerry first came here, and he had built a hatchery, and the chickens were laying eggs, Jerry asked Margie Hull and me to weigh the eggs. And we were down in what I call the old house, the one that Joe Steele had lived in this little room with shaky windows on both sides and a door. And then there was a door into a cellar built into the hill for, in case of a tornado or anything. But my washing machine and my dryer were out there, and we had a little scales. And so Margie, they bring in these orange wire baskets filled with eggs, and Margie and I would weigh these eggs and then put them in small, medium, and large containers, and which was fine at first. We just did really well. But the eggs just kept coming and coming and coming until it was all we could do to find a place to put our feet. And we were so grateful that we never stepped in a basket of eggs. We never did, but we could have. So Margie and I had fun. It was cold in the winter, though, because that wind came through. And but we got those eggs weighed, and it was quite an experience. That was how we really helped Jerry get started.
And what other stories can you think of about Tontitown, the Tontitown area? Do you remember, you mentioned Artemati's store. Do you remember any other stores back in the day? I mean, how often would you go to Tontitown to trade? And
I don't remember, except for the restaurants.
You mentioned Ralph Pendergrass produce stand.
That's right. I do remember something. Ralph and Nancy Pendergrass had a produce market up on 412 where Arvest is now. And Ralph hired my daughter Catherine, and to work up there. She was in high school. And one day he went into the cooler to get out a watermelon, and Kathy closed the door and locked it. And so Ralph sat in the cooler until somebody let him out. Kathy finally let him out, and he didn't get angry at all. He was just sitting there with his face in his hand, just taking it easy. Good-natured man, good-natured man.